Greetings from around the world. My name is Tom, and welcome to the Fetish Traveller. This podcast is all about us sitting down with key figureheads of fetish communities around Europe and the rest of the world. We're going to be learning more about their history, what's going on at this current point in time, and what the future could hold. So, sit back with a drink of your choice and enjoy the podcast. We are incredibly proud to have Leathermen Travel support us on this podcast journey. You're planning a future leathery trip? Don't worry, Leathermen Travel have got your back. Visit their website to learn more about leather and fetish events, clubs and weekends happening around the globe. In this second episode, we sit down with Pup Buumi. In the 2010s, Buumi jumped onto the UK pup and handler scene. In 2018 and 2019, he held the title of Puppy UK and Puppy Europe. So, with his knowledge of the UK and European scene, we'll talk and have a conversation about how the pet play community has evolved over time, but what challenges they are still currently facing. So, without further ado, let's get those pup hoods on and jump straight into the podcast. So, Buumi, welcome. Thanks for jumping onto the podcast. How are you doing this evening as we're speaking?
I am doing very well, thank you.
Oh, perfect stuff. So, the last time we caught up would have been, if my brain is correct, a couple of weekends ago. It feels like it was only yesterday at the Puppy UK and Handler election. Is that right? How are you? How are you feeling after that?
Um, it was a stressful weekend. We had a few little bumps, but we managed to kind of get everything sorted, and I think we elected two people that I think will go on and do pretty well so far. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. So for some listeners who don't know, I should have probably asked the question first, but Buumi is an imperative part of the Team Puppy team here in the UK, in terms of helping out with such weekends, really. So with that in mind, Buumi, would you be able to tell the audience, just in a few sentences, a little bit about you?
So I am Papai Buumi. Papai comes from pushing together the Spanish papi and pup, so it literally means Daddy Buumi. So Papai Buumi. I've been a pup since 2010 privately, but publicly only since 2016. When I first started kind of attending events. I was obviously Puppy UK in 2018, and I was Mr. Puppy Europe in 2019. And I can't get enough of traveling around all of Europe, catching up with all my friends, meeting new puppies, going to new events. So yeah,
Yeah.
a little
So
bit
this,
about me.
so for the audience, this is why I specifically wanted Buumi to be on the podcast, because he's a mirror image of me, basically, without wearing my pup gear. So in essence, Buumi, as you know, with the podcast, we're going to talk about the history, the present, and the future of a particular community scene. In this case, I'm really keen to learn a bit more from you about that, from the puppy and handler scene in the UK, how it's all started, what's the state of the nation now, and almost what your fetish utopia looks like in the distance. So with that in mind, let's kind of kickstart how it all started for you then. If we take a trip down memory lane, what got you into, all things puppy and handler in the first place?
Oh, so it was I first found out about pup play in 2003. Did a little bit of role play on MSN back in the day.
Oh, wow.
But at that time, I just started dating someone, and they weren't up for following through on that, and so I didn't really get to try pup play until 2010 when I was down in London doing a training course, and I started speaking to someone on, I think it was Gaydar.
Wow, you're really firing through
I'm
with all of these
really
old
throwing it
social
back
media
now.
platforms, right?
I know, right? Um, yeah, and I experienced it. He basically put a collar on, he got me on my knees, and I was just like, okay, this is fun. And I started barking at him as we were snuggling, and it was just like it just felt like the most natural thing in the world. Um, so kind of put play for me was very much a kind of a bedroom thing
Yeah.
for a long time, and I think when people find their fetish, I think it starts off very much dipping your toe in the water, and that's how it started for me.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't through until 2016 that I met my now ex-partner, and he was like, "Oh, you should come to an event." He wasn't a pup, but he enjoyed going out. So The first event I ever went to was the documentary that was being filmed for Spot, The Secret Life of Human Pups.
Hmm.
So if you look closely at the in the background, you can see a very young, very anxious and nervous Buumi in the background.
Oh, so the audience can't see me, but my eyes have just glistened there because from my side, I got to know the pup and handler scene through that documentary. I think many people in the UK and beyond the UK borders would kind of recognize how important that was for people starting off in the scene. And that, as I said, that's how I first got to know. So I've got to take a trip down memory lane and have a look at that documentary then after this one. But it's great to see that red thread already.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of went from there. I enjoyed the kind of the experience so much, and it was very different from what I was expecting. I was expecting it to be literally people kind of having sex in corners and
Mm,
and the pup. So kind of seeing that pup play wasn't so much about the what gets done in the bedroom. There was a headspace to it, and there was just that kind of playful nature to it. I think that started to kind of ask questions in my head and open my eyes to kind of the wider scene.
yeah.
Um, and then it was later that year that I attended Puppy UK for the first time as a visitor, and I just thought, "Do you know what, that looked really fun." And I think it was from there that it went from just kind of something that I enjoyed doing in my spare time to kind of something that I wanted to be more involved in.
Mm. Boomy, it kind of sounds like you started off in the scene, getting out of your shell, 2016 time. At that time, or even beforehand, what events were taking place around the UK? Where could the pups and handlers go to find themselves?
Yes, so around that time, there were probably about 9 or 10 events up and down the United Kingdom. They were all very geared towards socializing.
Mm.
Some of them would have had soft play spaces. Recently, I've heard the term: is it a two-legged event or is it a four-legged event? To kind of denote whether or not you're going to be stood around, kind of like chatting, socializing, making friends, or whether you're going to be on the kind of the mats. And it was very much it was a pup space. I think this concept of handlers has only really kind of come about in the last few years.
Mm.
Um, Prior to that, it was very much the kind of the puppy events were where you went out to kind of meet other people that wanted to chase balls around the map, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. So it kind of even also going back around that time in the mid 2010s, boom, it does sound like it was quite imperative, not only because of the documentary that probably came out, but at the time when the apps was really starting to come alive, it was a chance for you all to connect and kind of obviously talk to each other and realize, okay, I'm not the only person who likes wearing a hood, for example. What was there, even casting your minds back, what were there any other let's say moments even in the 2000s or even in the early 2010s that you can think of that kind of really started the wave of all of the pups and now obviously handlers joining?
I think the so around 2017, 2018, I think there was obviously that awareness of pups. There was the documentary. I got to speak on BBC Radio 2 on the Emma Barnett show, I think it was.
Hey, okay.
Um, so I think around that time there was probably there was a good number of pups, but it was around that time that I think pup place started to kind of grow. I think the shops getting gear in. I think the types of gear that were available out there were starting to come through. I think fetish events also started recognizing that there were these people that enjoy kind of putting on a pup hood, getting on all fours, and kind of role playing as a dog or a pet. Um, so I think in the kind of like the mid tens, I think it was creating the platform of it was like a perfect storm of there's
Mm,
people that are interested in it and there's gear and knowledge out there as to kind of what it's about. And I think it was just a perfect storm of that coming together that kind of then saw growth happen over
mm.
probably the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, brilliant. And that now we're at a stage in the present where obviously it's almost like pup and handler takeover in the best way possible at all of these international events.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fantastic to see that. And I don't know about you still, Boomy, but from my side, when speaking to people about what their first fetish was, getting into the scene, it kind of used to be the traditional parts of leather and the rubber, but now obviously it's more accustomed to going more into the pup and handler space. Could you tell me a little bit more about why do you think that is?
So I've always felt that pup play is a gateway fetish.
Mm,
Um, so you don't need any gear to be a pup. And in fact, one of my favorite questions to ask contestants at elections is if someone were to come up to you and you had to explain what pet play was, how would you kind of get it across to them? And so for me, the easiest thing that they can do is find a squeaky toy or a sock,
mm.
get down on all fours, and just kind of like chase it around the floor.
Yeah.
Maybe bark a little bit, growl. If you're trying to do it with a partner, maybe kind of get them to kind of play fetch with you. Kind of if you're in bed, maybe just kind of like growling and like
Mm,
nibbling in their on their ear. It's like there's lots of little things that you can do to kind of start to access the headspace. Um, and so I think um, being able to kind of go from I really enjoy this, and for me, pup play, I was always into fetishing kind of like sports kits and sports gear
hmm.
and socks especially. And so for me, kind of going from sports gear to pup play was kind of made sense because pups like socks,
Yeah.
and so it was kind of a natural progression. And my first hood was a leather hood. And I remember putting it on for the first time and smelling leather, and I was just like, "Oh my god, this smells amazing!"
Mm.
So, my journey's kind of has happened through kind of like scents,
Hmm.
through smell, and then I think from going to Folsom for the first time, going to a rubber party there, I needed a rubber outfit. I remember my first rubber, and I just remember thinking to myself, "Well, this feels amazing," and just kind of like I couldn't stop touching myself and just like touching the rubber. Um, so I definitely think that pup play is an easy gateway into other experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be any type of pup. You can be a sporty pup. You can be a leather pup. You can be a rubber pup. You can be a naked pup.
Mm. It's almost like the Spice Girls, isn't it? You can just pick and choose which one you want to be. I think we should
That
start a band. You, me,
Spice Girls
yeah,
or Village People.
village. Yeah,
But you
exactly.
you got your leather man. You got your sporty man. Sporty pup. Yeah.
I think we've got our idea for our next Darklands or Fetish Vision when that comes out. Brilliant,
Yes.
love. Well, listen,
YMCA with
eh,
the leather people.
you're on, love. Well, listen, you were kind of mentioning the bigger events, and we've kind of nicely progressed now into where the present is really in terms of the scene. So we can talk about that in the UK now. And I don't know about you, Boomy, but when we kind of talk about the state of the nation for, leather, rubber, pup play, all sorts of fetishes right now, we talk about the events that take place that are situated, and then who goes to the events. So obviously, you mentioned that, and from my side, I can vouch for the London scene. There are still several of fantastic pup and handler friendly events to go to. I can think of some names, many of them taking place around Central Station, which for many of those who don't know the name is almost like an informal fetish clubhouse that takes place. I mean, the Collard group have been going on for so many years now and have really maintained a great reputation up the spine of the UK. But kind of whatever other like big weekend events are taking place around the UK each year?
So in terms of the UK, in terms of the big one-off events, I know that there are a couple of people that organise camping events. I organised one a couple of years ago. You've got Doggy Weekend in Manchester, which is probably the biggest one by far at the
Mm,
moment.
mm,
Um, I think other than that, I think you've I mentioned earlier when I became Puppy UK, there was about 10 events. I think we've got about 22 events at the moment up and down the country.
wow.
Um, I was thinking to myself, should I attempt to name them all? But I'm not too sure. You
Don't
you,
worry,
men-
love.
you mentioned Collard, so there's Collard London, Collard Manchester.
Yeah.
My own event in Birmingham is Club Scriptures.
Hmm.
Then Stoke is Doghouse. You've got Manchester, which is Kennel Club. Leeds is Unleashed. Then you've got Mucky Pups down in Bristol. You've got Pup
Mm,
out in London. You've got Howl and Paws out in Newcastle. Sherlocked in Blackpool. Scott's Pups have an event in Edinburgh every now
hmm.
and again. Cardiff Pups meet in the Eagle in Cardiff.
Uh-huh.
The Irish pups, they've got events. They're really well like tightly linked with the Leathermen over there
Yeah.
and the Rubbermen. And then you've got Paws down on the south coast. Oh, and you've got Kennel Club South
Mm.
in Brighton. So do you know what? I think I've got them all.
I
There's
think
some new
you've
ones.
I think you've got them all, and you're obviously you're mentioning more of the social ones that I can for me coming along to the weekend 2 weekends ago, all of these names are firing across to me, and I have no idea about them at all. And I can imagine you've got the bigger weekends, but these are obviously just the monthly socials that I can imagine
Yeah,
regularly take place. So, and you're mentioning parts of the UK that yeah, you've got some big cities, but you've got some smaller vicinity areas as well. And I don't know about you, but especially after COVID, there seems to be so many fetish, in particular socials that have been popping up in just smaller counties or regions of the UK that in which it's a bit more difficult for those inhabitants to obviously go to London, go to Birmingham, Cardiff, Manchester, wherever for just one event. Is that sounds almost the same from the pup and handler scene? Is that
it
right?
does. I think access to fetish. I think during the pandemic, I think people needed to find activities to help them kind of get out of their own head, and I think fetish, kind of pup play, I think was a big draw.
Mm.
So the kind of the amount of pups that were out there kind of exploded, coming out of the last kind of 3 years. But on the
Mm.
back of that, I think there was a requirement that there was quite a diverse segment of pups. There was a lot of young pups with some older pups in there. But I
Mm.
think that the problem was that sometimes it's difficult to travel far for an event. And
Yep.
so the closer and more accessible you can be to an event, I think the better it is for you. So I think as a necessity of what we've been through the past few years, kind of people then took it on themselves. And it's great that people are stepping up and trying to put on events because
Mm.
we need people like that in the community. Otherwise, events disappear.
Yeah.
So, really thankful to everyone that kind of um, is currently running an event, runs an event, or is looking to set up an event. Because they're really important for the longevity of the communities
Mm.
that kind of go to them. So
Yeah, I yeah, I don't, I couldn't vouch for that anymore, really, Boomy. I think when there was that wave of social media ness and all of the apps, I think we all assumed that our problems were going to be fixed and we didn't need to create these events. But I think in that whole, it sounds so cringy saying this, in the post-COVID landscape,
yeah.
as some of my lecturers used to say, it seems to be that we're accepting that the in-person events are just absolutely imperative and what makes this community go around more than anything rather than all of I know obviously social media for me, I jumped onto the scene with the help of apps such as Recon, Bluff for me, um Scruff, and then obviously developing your social media fetish accounts. They're obviously important and a huge gateway for all of us getting onto the scene. But when you make that next step to go into the in-person events, and I think then you start to snowball, you do the national events, the international events, and that's when you think, oh God, there's so much more to this, you know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh, brilliant. So what one thing that I was really struck by, I must admit, when I was at the Puppy UK Handler weekend, was how diverse the crowd was, and it was so incredibly refreshing to see this. And that's not belittling the events that I usually go to, but it seems to be at that event in particular, I was just so awestruck by how many people from certain backgrounds were there, visible and proud to showcase it. And that's not only the contestants who were up on stage, but just everybody who I had the privilege to speak to. Is that something that is a bit that has been a case in the pups and handler scene in particular, for all of its longevity, or is that kind of a recent trend?
Um, I think I mentioned earlier. I think put play is quite accessible because it's basically what you make it. So if you've got physical limitations, you can still kind of enter into headspace and you can do what you feel you
Mm.
can do. And I think over the past kind of probably since the pandemic, I think people have been more. Um, I'm trying to think of the word. Um, they're trying to encourage more inclusion and diversity within the community. With everything that's
Yeah.
going on in the world, I think there's a feeling that it doesn't matter if you're a cis man or a trans woman, or if you're
Mm,
able-bodied, or if you're from a whatever background you're from. Um, I think everyone is welcome at a puppy event.
mm,
Um, and I mean, there are a few instances where, so for example, there are some venues that accessibility is a real issue.
mm.
Um, what I can't think of the name. The one in Manchester, Kennel Club.
Oh yeah,
You have to go down the stairs, and there's no access.
yeah.
So I know that's a problem. And some of our contestants from Puppy UK last year, their aims was to kind of aim for better accessibility at venues.
Mm.
Um, our outgoing Puppy UK Scruff, she did her Bark Against campaign, which was she wrote a 17,000 word thesis on the state of pup play in the UK when it comes to inclusion and diversity.
Gosh.
So she's got a really kind of uh, good view of kind of what the UK makeup looks like.
Yeah, as long as we can see an abstract of that, that would be fantastic, and that can be sent out to everybody because that sounds
There is
like a good
she's got a
read.
website. She's got a website, barkagainst.co.uk, I think it is.
There
So
you
I
go.
call out Scruff there.
Oh my God, brilliant. No, the venue that you're mentioning is really, really the venues that I can think of. And I think it's a problem that it's just the nature of the venues that we host our fetish venues here in the UK. I know that in America they host the big weekends at literal convention centers where just through the pure nature of the venues they have to have accessibility. But I don't know about you. From my side, I go to a lot of the socials that are in London, in Soho. The pure nature of Soho as a part of London is that all of the venues are very historical, very traditional pubs that a lot of us love the look of it, but we need to remember that there's a flight of stairs there, and realistically, some people will struggle to get up there, and that is a form of discrimination that maybe from a leather and a general fetish side is something that is still pretty untapped.
Yeah, definitely. I, I think obviously over the last kind of 10, 5, 10, 15 years, we've seen good venues disappear, unfortunately. I think there are still a number of venues out there, but unfortunately, because they are historic buildings and they're of a certain age,
Mm,
when they were built, accessibility wasn't at the forethought. Um, and I think if people have got the decision to make of do I put on an event that isn't accessible to people, or do I not put on an event because I don't have a venue,
mm.
then they're going to go with the option that they have, unfortunately, which is it's still filling a need. People will still go. It just means that some people miss out.
Mhm.
Um, I do know a lot of pup events at the forefront of their mind is accessibility and inclusion and diversity, and trying to make sure that all are welcome in those spaces. As you say, the kind of the event a couple of weeks ago, Puppy UK. I think that was probably the most diverse crowd we've had. It's
Mm.
been building year on year, but I think that was not just the contestants, but the kind of the attendees as well. And there wasn't a lot of space, but we still managed to make sure that people were accommodated. I think we did the best with what we had.
God, for me, I don't blame you at all. For obviously, whilst it's these weekends are stressful, that venue was great to cater the needs of people coming across from all walks of life. So it kind of sounds like all things accessibility is a barrier that can hopefully be overcome. Do we? I mean, we've obviously talked about diversity and inclusion, and if the venue's right, the UK scene is fantastic and a pioneer for welcoming people from all walks of life. And as you
Mhm.
rightly mentioned, Boomy, just through the nature of pup play, it's very easily accessible for everybody. Are there any other? It's not really an issue, but to your point, a barrier kind of in the scene that kind of needs to be possibly made more aware of it? Are there any kind of parts or pillars that need rebuilding?
I mean, I think we have talked about the inclusion, diversity. I think gear has always been a challenge.
Mm,
You don't need gear to be a pup, but gear can be quite expensive. There are a lot of vendors that make cheap gear. You can get cheap hoods from China.
Yeah.
Um, my advice to anyone would always be save up for a good piece of gear because it'll last you a lot longer than something that's
Mm.
£10 off a Wish. Um,
Yeah.
so so
Yeah. I
is
mean,
that is that
from
a block?
no, for me, I definitely think it is. There's no need for you to even ask that rhetorical question. But from our perspective, with London, obviously, for people who have recently moved into London, and it can be a pinch, not only London, but the big cities here in the UK. We now revert to all things secondhand. From my experience, it's all things leather gear. So going to Camden Market, I feel ridiculously privileged that we've got Camden Market, Shoreditch High Street, where you've got all of these vintage and secondhand shops, which, yeah, you might have to sift through some leather because it might not be the right jacket that you're looking for. But they some people do. I mean, there were some people who clearly did sell or give away their fetish leather gear, and a friend of mine said that he got a pair of Rob jeans for £25. And
That's a bargain.
it's absolutely ridiculous. And so I think that just showcases the importance of getting out there, doing some research of some secondhand shops, yeah, that could sell leather. The London alternative market is probably a fantastic example of a independent list of retailers who obviously flogging some good quality gear, but not at that stereotypical price that you'd expect at these big weekends. So for me, I'd completely vouch for accessibility of buying secondhand gear, and yeah, doing a bit of saving at the same time. I think there's the term that it's a marathon, not a sprint, like
Yeah,
jumping into
definitely.
the scene, and that level of pressure when you're online, you're flicking through Instagram, you think, oh crap, I haven't bought X, Y, and Z brand, or I don't look like them, and oh, I'm only 6 months into my 10 years being a pup, a leather man, a leather dyke, whatever. It's like, okay, just relax. This is a marathon and not a sprint, love. Fabulous. So it kind of sounds like we're kind of tying the knot quite well from a UK perspective. I think possibly the audience have forgotten that you did have a 10-year doing your Puppy Europe year right before COVID started, really a few years ago. Now, the question then to firstly ask you, we've talked about the UK scene for quite a bit. How does that differ possibly to the European scene, or are there any similarities to what we've talked about? What's your take?
I think definitely the UK scene is a very well-grown pub community.
Hmm.
We've got a lot of pub players. We've got a lot of venues and events. I think around Europe, it can be quite different from country to country. I think after the UK, probably Germany has got the biggest pub community. They
Yep.
seem to have pub communities in most of their major cities. So Hamburg, Munich, Berlin, Cologne, all have kind of really big pub communities within them. I think Spain is probably next after that.
Okay.
I know again major cities, so Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia,
Hmm.
um, and I'd probably say if anyone's traveling, they're probably the easiest two countries to go to and find pub events or pub meetups that are happening.
Yeah. And is
And
that just quickly
yeah,
interfering, but Boomy, you kind of talk about Germany and Spain being two other big hitters from a puppy scene in Europe. Is that from a leather perspective that we kind of base that there were kind of countries and cities that started off the leather scene almost in the 60s and the 70s, and that was based off the clubs that started. So you'd have London, you'd have Amsterdam, you'd have Hamburg and the Scandinavian clubs. Is that how trying to almost think of the question really. In Germany, in the big cities, and in Spain, did that start just how I guess the main question is really why did they become so popular in your view?
oh, that's a good question. I mean, in Germany, I think that they've always been quite open to new experiences, and so I think when pub play came along, I think it was a good opportunity to try something new.
Mm,
Um, I know in Spain, a lot of hard work's gone into kind of building up the community.
Mm.
And SLFC have kind of have helped with that, and there's a couple of other groups in Spain. Public Play Spain. I know there's a group in Barcelona, but they've done a lot of kind of outreach to people on all the apps.
Mm.
It's probably the best way to find someone that's interested in it is to just kind of someone will message you and go, "Oh, I'm really interested in this. Can you tell me more about it?" And then you have the conversation. They maybe come to an event, they join a group, and it grows. So I think out of the European countries, I think those are probably the biggest geographical scenes
Mm.
and populated scenes of pubs. And then a lot of the other countries. You mentioned Scandinavia. There is a fledgling puppy community in Scandinavia. We'll call it fledgling.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I was there a couple of years ago for Puppy Sweden,
Hmm.
and it was in one of the leather bars, the event, and I think there was maybe 10 pups in
Yeah.
total. I know Norway is currently in the process of trying to grow their community. Met a Norwegian pup this weekend when I was in Prague.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I think Scandinavia is lagging behind Southern Europe when it comes to their pup communities, but it is starting to get traction.
Yeah. And maybe I think the I was talking to Tio about this in the first episode. We mentioned, but I mean, my experience from the UK coming to fetish events is that they are a lot of these events are kind of just one fetish event. So in the sense that you won't often have a mixture of different fetishes at one event, and that could possibly be primarily down to the culture of events that have always happened in the UK. However, obviously, if you go to the bigger international events such as your Folsoms and Darklands, yeah, it's pretty easy to blend the fetishes. But I guess the question to ask you, with your experience doing the traveling in these different venues in these different cities and countries, is there a decent, does the pup and handler community blend in quite well with other fetishes?
I think it does. I think different countries probably blend in more with particular. So, for example, in Spain and in Italy, probably in France actually as well. I think
Hmm.
there are a lot more sporty pups.
Okay.
They like to be comfortable. I think when you kind of think of some of the other countries, probably Germany, I'd probably say it's more towards the traditional kind of pup aesthetics. So kind of like
Hmm.
the leather and the rubber. So I think some countries there is a closer tie with one fetish over the others. But we talked about it earlier. I think pup play is a good gateway to try other fetishes. So you'll still go to an event. You'll still see leather pups there. You'll still see rubber pups there. You'll still see sporty pups there. Lycra
Hmm.
pups.
We can't
Forgot
forget
lycra.
them.
Can't
Yeah.
forget lycra. Um,
Oh, brilliant. And in terms of the obviously it sounds like there's a real diverse mix of the gear that you can wear in terms of pup play, and that can depend of whereabouts you're based around Europe. But the puppies, regardless of what they wear, are there are the events around Europe that you go to, do you see a mixture of, leather men, rubber men, pups, handlers, skinheads, for example? Is the general mix pretty balanced with the events that you've seen in the past and even now?
I think so. I think different countries obviously approach pup play differently as well. So I think the Southern European countries and probably Germany, they're a bit more regimented in their approach to kind of what pup play should be. So you might see more of the traditional kind of handler and pup. Whereas in some of the more kind of like liberal countries, like Ireland, like UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, there's probably a lot more pups that do it for the headspace rather than the kind of the formality.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there's kind of like a north-south divide on kind of
Yeah.
on the scale of what put players, but I think there's an east-west as well.
Mm.
And it's quite interesting visiting different countries and experiencing their take on what put players and how it's going to develop. I mentioned I was in Prague at the weekend. I think they had a really good mix of different types of pups, whether it was for headspace, whether it was for their own kind of fetish, rubber, leather, naked. Yeah, it was such a good mix
Mm.
of people, men, women. I'm just trying to think. Who else was there? I think I can't remember seeing any differently abled people there,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was still a good mix, and the venue they held it in was really good as well. It was
Oh.
accommodated. There was 200 of us there, so it was very well accommodated.
Well, as long as you've got some pictures to showcase us, that'll be brilliant. I
I've
think
got
it's fair. I think it's fair to say at all of these events that either include fetishists or non-fetishists. All of the energy goes on the pups these days and the handlers. You obviously all of you do the walk at Antwerp when you're in Darklands, just going through the city, traversing. I think, you know
Do you
what?
know what? Pup walks are kind of so much fun because, I mean, yeah, the Darklands pup walk, the Folsom, the East of Berlin pup walk, you're getting kind of like 300, 400 pups walking through the city, just like they're having a stroll. And it's generally well received
Hmm.
from a lot of people. We did get some bad press a few weeks ago, just after Folsom,
Right.
that did the rounds internationally. Um, but on the whole, it's generally kind of well received by people.
Hmm. Brilliant.
You'll
Happy
have to come
day.
on the next pub walk at Darklands or at in Berlin.
Well, I think everybody at the weekend, at the Puppy UK Handler weekend, were edging me on to get into my headspace, get into it. I do have some Team Puppy UK gear that's under my bed, and it does need dusting off, I must admit. I very gratefully got this at a bingo event. I can't remember where it is, but that could be the start of it. Oh, brilliant. So we it kind of seems that now we're to the stage in the podcast where we've talked a little about the history, we've talked about the state of the nation in the UK, all around Europe. From your perspective, then, almost if you had a magic wand, let's say, where could you see where in essence, where could you see the pup and handler scene going into the future?
So I think different countries are at different stages of this already.
Mm,
I think with growth of events, I think you get discord between people. So I think one of the things that I would like to kind of say we need to be better at is getting along with each other,
hmm.
especially when you're in a country that maybe doesn't have as many events. I think variety is a good way of masking discord between people because you can choose
Mm,
to go to a different event to the people you don't want to see. But
yeah.
in smaller countries, if you've only got one event and that's your only opportunity to pup, then you kind of a little bit stuck. So I think one of the things that I would look to do is try to help people kind of coexist within the
Hmm.
community. I think more events. I think you can never have too many events.
Yeah.
And more diversity of events, accessibility. We talked about inclusion and diversity a lot.
Mm,
But I think getting the kind of a good number of events that are accessible, that are well equipped, because I
mm,
mentioned earlier there's a difference between a two-legged event and a four-legged event, and it's great going to the bar and having a drink with your friends, but it doesn't help you get into pub headspace if that's what you want. So I think having the opportunity to have mats on the floor, squeaky toys, kind of like cushions to just kind of like fall down on and just kind
yeah.
of like rest for a few minutes. I think kind of yeah. So better coexisting with people, more events, um, equipment for those events,
Mm.
and free travel for everyone to get there.
Free reign on all then. Perfect.
Yeah,
Well, we'll see what Rishi Sunak can do sometime in the future. God knows now that we don't have Mrs. Braverman really here. But it's yeah, from my side, I probably couldn't agree more. And I was grateful to be a judge a couple of weekends ago for the UK and Puppy UK and Handler competition. And a question I really asked because I was interested and I seeked to understand was to what extent what was their take on how pups and handlers could coexist more with different fetishes. And I kind of talked about this with you a few minutes ago, and sometimes I get some comments from the odd kind of Leatherman, also about saying that they struggle to coexist and be in the same space. I guess at these bigger events, with different fetishes, and that's something that can be quite tricky to get somebody to adapt into, kind of just saying, look, that this event isn't just for what your preferred fetish is. It's a space for
Mhm.
everybody, basically, and that level of prudence, I don't know if there's even a word for prudency or being prudent, needs to almost kind of be a bit tempered with, and that's something that I find a bit distressing, really, hearing that. So some people feeding that back to me. It's not everybody, but that's something that I wish could be eliminated as much as possible, if that made sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It actually reminds me of an event I went to in Toronto in
Mm,
2018. It was a mixed sex pup fetish party,
hmm
where you were allowed to go and play in the dark room. You're even allowed to play on the mats if you wanted
mm,
to have sex on the mats.
okay.
And I remember the organizer of it, a pup called Argo. Um, he he got literally everyone together. There was about maybe 50, 60 pups there. Got everyone
Mm,
together at the start of the event and was like, right, this is a shared space. We're here to have a good time. If you So he talks about consent. It's like if you want to play with somebody, ask them. If they say
mm,
no, don't be a dick. Just they've said no.
yeah.
If you see someone having sex over here and you think, that's not for me, then go over there. And it kind of just the way that he spoke and kind of contextualized the nature of the event. I think you're kind of like Leathermen going to mixed fetish events and seeing Rubbermen. His voice in my head is like, if you don't like what's over there, then go over there. Then go over to the other side of the room. And
Yeah.
it was just it was a nice. It wasn't done with any kind of um, like overbearing or kind of like aggression. It was just a very much an informative. If you're not like something that's happening on the right, then go over to the left,
Yeah.
or go to the bar and get a drink, or kind of have a walk. Yeah, and I think um, why can't we all just get along?
I know.
Um,
It's that real Disney like, isn't it? I mean, look,
yeah,
there's always going to be a market for people to go to like pure fetish events,
yeah.
because that's what an event organizers could be very well known for organizing. But I think at these bigger European or international events, when you do have people complaining about being in the same space as fetishes that might be a bit new to them, it's kind of just thinking, look, take a chill pill. This could be the only event around Europe in which they could be have the freedom and the liberation to be able to be themselves and wear what they want to, for example. I mean, ABDL is probably the best example of that. Whilst it's nothing that I'm very much experienced with, that's kind of the new fetish and the new headspace that's kind of on the map, really, and that's going to be the next thing that people would be kind of raising their eyebrows, that I can imagine. So it's almost, turning down that stigmatism of kind of, turning your nose and your eyes up at it, really is, but I mean, it's easier said than done, things like
I'm
this.
going to ask you a question.
Oh, okay.
Do you think that there is a leather headspace? Does
Yeah.
does such a thing as a leather headspace exist?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's almost a byproduct of all things BDSM, basically. With me, my partner won't mind me saying that I love kind of just like curling up against his one of or both of his legs, basically, because similar to what you said, you love the smell of it, you love the feel of it, and you do love that dom sub relationship that can come along with it, basically. I mean, for me, my primary purpose of wearing leather is because I love how it makes me feel, that level of confidence that doesn't turn you into a dick. But then I love the history behind various leather gears, where it's biker gear, uniform gear, everything in between. But a lot of people do wear the leather because that's a part of their BDSM headspace and role, really. But yeah,
Mhm.
that leather headspace is something that is definitely prominent. I guess the question is to both of us, or rhetorically, if that's even talked about too much these days. But there definitely is one when you go to parties, or regardless how big they are, or even at the social events, or just talking to people about various relationships they have in the leather scene. That it's still, and I'm sure it will be in the future, very prominent. Yeah, I don't see why not. Perfect. So I think we're there really, Boomy. I don't know about you, but I think we've definitely pulled out everything that we can possibly do in about 40-50 minutes, love.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say a massive thank you for coming along, taking your time out. I don't know about the audience, but I've learned a hell of a lot. And I now know what the events to go to are in the UK, Europe. I now know the history of it all, and where the potential barriers are to be lifted up. So, Boomy, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, a big thanks, mate, for coming alongside. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, mention, final words?
Final words. I would love it if more Leathermen gave up to the opportunity of handling puppies at events. I think from the history of kind of power dynamic relationships, I think like when you've got sirs and boys and doms and subs, I think handlers and pups are another element to that, and I think more Leathermen should give it a go.
Oh, right. To all the Leathermen in the audience, this is your next task, and I will be speaking to every one of you at our next event. Boomy, thank you so much, mate, and
Thank you
take
very much
care.
for having me.